Mikhail Gorbachev's dreams of holding the Soviet Union together may have received a death blow today. The Union's three Slavic republics announced they are forming a separate Commonwealth of Independent States. Russia.
On December 26, 1991, a global population of more than 5 billion people no longer lived their lives with the fear of a Third World War. As a result of bankruptcy, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had collapsed, making the world's first communist country the very first to fall. The outcome was almost immediate. After half a century, the Cold War was finally over. Just when the inhabitants of the earth believed the fighting would never cease, one man led a nation forward. One man who would challenge the notion of America's nuclear strategy and inspire others to fight against the spread of socialism, appropriately earning him the title, the Great Communicator. He galvanized politics with words and ideas that revolutionized the nation, despite skepticism from industry insiders. And when enterprises were on the verge of crumbling, he built them back. Ronald Reagan. In the August of 1945, more than 100,000 people were killed and wounded in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It introduced a new technology to the world, the atomic bomb, which particularly caught the interest of Russian scientists who were determined to develop these weapons for their own country. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated their first bomb, shocking the United States, who doubted the state of their nuclear knowledge. 2 years later, on September 24, 1951, the Soviets initiated their second bomb test. At this point, it was clear the Russians had no intention of slowing down weapon production. By the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, both powerhouses were now capable of manufacturing what would undoubtedly cause unprecedented damage. Reacting to the danger, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense under the John F. Kennedy administration, had implemented a new doctrine, Mutual Assured Destruction, known as MAD for short. This allowed the United States to guarantee retaliation to the Soviet Union in the event of a missile strike. MAD saw a bright start concerning Russian politicians and engineers alike, but eventually failed to usher in new progress as the Soviets continued to create more nuclear weapons. Someone had to devise an alternate strategy. A brilliant thinker his entire life, Ronald Reagan gained national recognition in 1964 when he delivered his famous A Time for Choosing speech, where he highlighted international affairs and presented his solutions to support presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. This earned the campaign $1 million in attributions, but the excitement was short-lived when Goldwater lost the election. Down but not out, Reagan prepared to win the presidency himself, anticipating his chance at the end of Richard Nixon's second term. But Nixon's early resignation in 1976 caused Gerald Ford to assume the position. Doing as he did numerous times in the past, Reagan persevered, and in 1980 defeated incumbent Jimmy Carter in the United States presidential election. It marked a new chapter in American politics, but the obstacles would not be easy to overcome. When World War II reached its conclusion, a new enemy of freedom gained prominence, the Communist Party. Throughout the continent of Asia, several countries rewrote their constitutions in order to apply socialist principles. Countries such as China, Korea, and Vietnam joined the growing number of communist nations. With heavy worldwide influence, the Soviet Union was able to occupy several territories, especially in Europe. This was solidified in 1961 with the construction of the Berlin Wall, a massive blockade that divided the once prosperous nation of Germany, tearing apart communities and splitting families. Reagan best summarized how he felt about the wall in 1983 during an address at the Capitol, where he uttered the famous words,
"Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall."
The U.S. stuck with the MAD policy, but now in office, Reagan was ready to make the change. Reagan created the Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly referred to by its abbreviation, the SDI. Unlike MAD, whose goal was to equal rivals in terms of power, the SDI instead focused on rendering nuclear missiles obsolete. Reagan encouraged scientists to go off the roadmap and focus on space-based technology, advertising the project would be finished by the end of the century. This gave the SDI the nickname of a popular science fiction film, Star Wars. Due to his appealing personal style and charm, persuading the American people was not difficult, but Congress was not hesitant to doubt Reagan. Legislators engaged in fierce arguments over the idea. The fact that unemployment was the highest it had been since the Great Depression and inflation was close to 10% did not help Reagan's case. This would further become an issue since Reagan had promised citizens tax cuts. Following months of debate, both Congress and the United States President would agree on a compromise that would bring world peace.
But when the president went on television this evening to talk about the Soviet military buildup and the need for an increased U.S. defense budget, he was doing so within minutes of a decisive rejection by the House of Representatives. They had just cut his proposed defense spending increase by more than half.
We can't afford to believe we will never be threatened. There have been 2 world wars in my lifetime. We didn't start them, and indeed did everything we could to avoid being drawn into them. But we were ill prepared for both. Had we been better prepared, peace might have been preserved. For 20 years, the Soviet Union has been accumulating enormous military might. They didn't stop when their forces exceeded all requirements of a legitimate defensive capability, and they haven't stopped now. During the past decade and a half, the Soviets have built up a massive arsenal of new strategic nuclear weapons, weapons that can strike directly at the United States.
1 year later, Ronald Reagan had convinced legislators to believe in his idea. Reagan's proposed tax cut and defense spending would be reduced to accommodate for his other projects, satisfying everyone involved. After putting the SDI into action, the USSR responded by increasing their defense spending to compete with the United States. It would only be a matter of time before that decision crumbled their economy. Seeing the SDI as a threat to the future of his country, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev repeatedly suggested that Reagan discontinue the Strategic Defense Initiative. By 1989, Gorbachev's efforts to rescue the Soviet Union from its downfall were unsuccessful. He then ordered the removal of the Berlin Wall and extracted Russian soldiers all throughout Europe. This began the domino effect, restoring liberty to many nations that had been deprived of it since the Cold War began. In 1991, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics saw its dissolution. Most importantly, however, were the reduction of arms. As of today, only 5 communist nations exist, 2 of which fully recognize private property. Reagan had managed to influence the American government to fund a plan that was not only ahead of its time, but instrumental in ending one of the longest and most trying periods in history. Innovator, visionary, a leader. He brought together people who were separated by conflict and assured them there would always be a better tomorrow. From the cities of New York to the towns of Poland, people have been saved from atomic bombs and nuclear missiles as a testament of what Reagan accomplished. We have been able to live in peace and prosperity because of Reagan's dedication and hard work in making the bombings in Japan during World War II the last and only usage of lethal explosions. In the heart of millions of political admirers, Reagan spoke the voice of the common people and fought for the safety of those around the globe. We are capable of negotiating and establishing deals and alliances with nations we once couldn't prior to his presidency. Ronald Reagan made it possible for the United States of America to become that shining city on the hill.
And I told Gorbachev, here you and I are, probably the only 2 men in the world who could bring about World War III. But by the same token, we may be the only 2 men in the world who could perhaps bring about peace. There was much more to be done, but we had laid a foundation in Geneva.